All right, buddy. So what's your name and where you from?
My name is Robert LaFleur. I'm from South Florida, and
South Florida. We have a lot of people on the show from Florida, man. I just got done doing an interview with someone from Florida. And your story, I mean, it's unique. I ain't had too many people on here that's done over 30 years in prison, man. And you have done 31, correct?
yes, I have.
And it was on the original sentencing was a life sentence,
Yes,
correct? So you coming out at 31 years is actually a huge blessing.
yes.
All right, man. Well, let's get into it. I'll let you take over from the beginning. How the hell did this shit unfold?
Well, first, um, I committed a totally senseless crime. You know, I was 16 years old, and you know how, well, you may not know how it is. A lot of people probably don't know how it is, but when you're running around in the streets, your name, your reputation is really important, and you end up doing dumb stuff, and I was in a situation where I just did something incredibly stupid, and I killed somebody, and ended up going to prison. I was sentenced to life, and
I mean, how did that come about? I mean, was it a dispute of some sort?
yes, and I'm prohibited from, as a term of my release, I'm prohibited from making any direct or indirect communication with the attempted murder victim. So I'm going to speak in general terms. Um,
Okay.
we were all involved in things that we shouldn't have been involved in. There's no justifying what I did. There was some bad feelings about some things that happened that somebody may or may not have done. And instead of me talking about it, I just acted on it. And then everybody
Uh,
became a loser. You know what I'm saying? I was not the worst affected of it all. I mean, I went to prison, but I was not shot and I was not dead. So,
I mean, you're 16, correct? So you're 16 years old.
yeah.
You got a murder charge. I mean, what the hell were you thinking? Did you even care that you had one? I mean, it really didn't matter to you from then on, did it?
No, at that point it was too late in the game really to worry about it. And this is going to sound really crazy. I was in prison long enough to see the system change many times over.
Yeah, I
And
can imagine.
yeah, and when I arrived in prison, there was actually less supervision in prison than there was in my high school, if you can imagine that. It was wide open, man. I'm talking about
Yeah,
it was wide open. Uh, everything you can imagine, just in a twisted and perverted sense. It was there. It was happening. It was going down, and it was like whatever problems arose were our problems. The cops didn't want to hear about it. The courts didn't want to hear about it. I mean, there were guys getting bodies in the chain gang back then and getting 6 and 7 years running concurrent.
yeah,
So if you had a 40-year sentence and you killed somebody, you'll probably get 4 or 5, 6 years and it's running concurrent. So it's like it's nothing at all.
yeah.
It was completely different than it is today.
So being 16, I'm guessing you went to like a JIT camp at first, correct?
No, no,
Okay.
not at all. No,
What?
I went to an adult camp from day one.
Okay. What they probably put you in some kind of max place, huh?
Well, I mean, in Florida back then, they really had one max place, which was FSP, and then everything else was just a different grade of the same thing. When I went to prison, there was only 36,000 inmates in the Florida system compared to over 100,000 today.
Yeah, that's
So,
wild.
yeah.
So 16 years old. I mean, what prison did they send you to? They sent you FSP?
No, I went to Henry, which is now closed. I mean, it's crazy. In the 31 years I was locked up, I did time at 3 camps that existed when I started doing time. All the rest of the camps I was at were built after I got to prison.
Okay.
So, yeah,
I mean, JIT camps were around back then, correct?
sure. But you weren't going to a JIT camp with a life sentence.
That's what I was about to say. So it did
Yeah.
matter if you had a life sentence or not. Uh, so tell me, what were the rules and regulations when it comes to this whole juvenile life? I know Many states vary. You know, some
Yeah.
people count what 30 years is a
Right.
life for juvie.
Well, in Florida, life is forever.
Yeah,
And at the time I was convicted, we were all sentenced for first degree murder. If you didn't get death, you got life with a 25-year minimum mandatory. And then you were eligible for parole, which in most cases, parole is kind of like the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot. You
you don't
know,
see it too much.
no, you hear about it, but you never really see it. You know,
Yeah, I mean, how many times did you go in front of parole?
I actually had 3 parole hearings, and it was wild. My first parole hearing, they send an examiner to you. Well, first of all, it's not like the Shawshank Redemption. You don't get to see the parole board. The parole board
Yeah,
never gets to see you.
yeah,
You know, it's just like a information gathering process. They'll send an examiner to see you, and the examiner comes in there. Everything's roses and puppy dogs and rainbows and balloons because they're in the room with you, so they don't want to give you the bad news. So they're
yeah,
going to recommend you for everything under the sun, and then it goes in front of the commission who sit high atop the mountain, and they're the ones that bash you. So
yeah.
my first parole examiner recommended in 2011, he recommended me for a 2023 release date and a 2-year interview cycle because in Florida, they can only change your parole status at a hearing. So he gave me a 2-year hearing cycle. And when that went in front of the parole commission, they batted that down and gave me a 2046 date with a 5-year review cycle.
Jesus,
Yeah.
that's
So,
crazy, man.
yeah. I
Well,
mean, if it wasn't for a small hiccup in the law here in Florida, I say a small hiccup because instead of it being a window, the Florida Supreme Court went through a drastic makeover with the new regime, the new governor, and 3 of the liberals and 3 of the liberals were pretty much dismissed because of their age, and he installed 3 conservatives. So now the conservatives have a 6-1 block, and they have been riding roughshod over not only the new cases but the older cases as well. Instead of these older cases having the benefit of an appeal, and the Sixth Amendment due process, they're just saying, we're receding from that opinion. We really want to do this now, and we're changing that. We really want to do this now. So initially, when the resentencing came about for guys like me, there were 455 inmates in the state of Florida eligible to be resentenced under the new juvenile practice.
I
And
think I remember reading about this
that's
actually.
right.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. It was a big thing in the papers, and
that's
it was
right.
nationwide news actually.
And what you didn't read about was in October of 2018, the Florida Supreme Court stepped back from that decision without benefit of an appeal and reversed it. And in the end, only about 60 of us ever got the chance to go in front of a judge.
And
And the
you were
rest
one
of
of them.
them, I was one of them. Yeah, I was very, very lucky, very
That's
fortunate.
crazy. Well, first before we get into how you managed to get up out of there, man. Did 31 years feel like 31 years?
It doesn't feel like it while you're doing it, you know? Um, I can't speak for how everybody does their time, and I can say right now, yeah, I was in prison for 31 years, 10 months, and 5 days. I wasn't counting it at that time. I counted it when it was over.
Yeah.
Afterwards, I sat back and counted, and I was like, wow, man. And
It's a lifetime.
yeah, I was in prison for 66% of my life. I got locked up at 16. I got out at 48. That's 32 birthdays.
How old do you think you were when you say you know for a fact you changed?
Well,
Every guy knows that
yeah.
age when they start thinking like a man. You know what I
can
mean?
tell you it was in 2002, 2003. And see, like I say, I can speak for myself and a lot of other guys. Even in prison, you're still doing wrong. You're messed up with drugs and gambling and all kinds of other stuff. There's respectable crimes in prison, and then there's dishonorable crimes in prison. You know what I mean? So, I was doing the respectable thing, and see, when I went to prison, guys had names. It's not like today. Back then, there were named characters in the joint. Like there was no social media, but you still heard, like they say,
Yeah.
or like I say, in prison, we've had Fenstagram for years. You know what I'm saying?
That's a damn good saying, man.
Yeah,
Instagram.
Fenstagram, they just caught up out here. You know, we have had social media in the joint forever because a guy shows up from a camp and he's there for a week and you already know what he did at the other camp, who he did it to, and how he ended up where you were at.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, like I say, we were all on Fenstagram way back then. And when you're doing wrong, at least when I was, every time I got caught up and went to the hole, you know, went to confinement, you know, I convinced myself that I made a mistake. You know, if I wouldn't have made a mistake, I wouldn't have got caught. I wouldn't have went to jail. I wouldn't be locked up in confinement. And then you realize, you know, that there's some pretty smart cops. You don't have to make a mistake for a smart cop to figure out what the hell happened and bust you. You know, so once you start realizing that they're smart too, you don't have to make a mistake. They really can do their job. It kind of changes the way you think, you know, because then it's like.
It kind of just changed the way I thought of things, you know, looking at it like that.
Sure. Because now, you know, and especially in today's world, I mean, anybody who's out here in the world committing a crime is destined for prison. Yeah. Technology is so accurate. You know, everybody is a broadcaster nowadays. Camera, Wi-Fi, internet. I mean,
everybody's a surveillance camera.
Everybody. So even if a man was dumb enough, and see, crime is really a young man's game or a dumb man's game, because people say, you know, crime doesn't pay. It does. Well, what it does is it loans. Because you'll hear a million guys in prison talking about, I didn't do this crime, but I got away with so much other stuff. You know, well, okay, so what you're saying is that you were just borrowing against your account and then you went to prison for this. And if you're doing something that's so significant that it's worth your time, it only takes one to get a whole boatload of prison time.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, unless you're out there knocking down parking meters, I mean, if you're doing something where you're going to really make a profit, there's a lengthy sentence waiting for you. So they really, you know, crime pays, it just loans it to you. And when it's time to pay it back, man, it's a hell of a check.
Yeah. Yeah. I can agree to that 100%. I mean, shit, there's so many questions I could ask you right now, man. You know, 31 years. And I know a lot of my viewers are like, man, why don't you come into these things more planned? But I think that's what makes this channel a little more authentic, because I don't plan nothing, man. I don't plan nothing. Well, let's talk a little bit more really quick before we get into the wild, crazy stories. Actually, I might make that a part 2. I don't know, man, because you got so much knowledge to tell us. What was the loophole, or what was the window, or whatever you named it, that got you up out of there earlier than planned?
Well, technically, it all began when the United States Supreme Court abolished the death penalty for juveniles. See, it's a matter of diminishing culpability. I mean, I can get technical about it. Well, basically what it is, the worst crime was death. So what they said was, we're going to take death off the table, and we're going to say that life is the equivalent of death. So that means that everybody's punishment had to go down a step, or at least have the opportunity for it. Because if I wasn't sentenced to death when I was sentenced, how could my sentence now be termed the equivalent of death? So it all had to drop down, or at least have the opportunity to drop down.
Yeah.
See? And in the beginning, that was in 2005. And then they kind of like trickled into the non-homicide cases, because now guys who had a life sentence were saying, look, man, you're saying I got the equivalent of death and I never killed anybody. Why should I have the equivalent of a death sentence? And the Supreme Court of America said, you know, you're right. So all the non-homicide cases got ushered into this age of enlightenment. And then because after 2005, since death was no longer an option, all the juveniles who got convicted of murder were automatically just given life sentences. And the judge never had a chance to say, no, I don't think you deserve a life sentence. I think you deserve something a little bit less. So because of the automatic nature, the Supreme Court said that juveniles are different and should be sentenced individually instead of en masse. So those guys were given an opportunity to present evidence to the judge and be given less than life. Well, in Florida, because our parole system is completely subjective as opposed to being objective, and the most popular and well known, even objective parole system is what O.J. Simpson had. See, when he went
Mm-hmm.
to prison, they gave him a list with check boxes and said, if you do this, 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 and this, you'll be eligible for parole on this date. Well, in Florida, parole is a grace. It's not a liberty. You have no interest, no right to parole. There's no program you could take. Even good behavior is not a basis for release from prison when you have a life sentence. So what happened was, as they say, all good and bad stories start like that. What happened was a guy filed for it, and a very good attorney, his name is Paul E. Patillo, he's a public defender in Palm Beach, took up the cause, and he
Public
fought for,
defender.
listen, man, and I was so, I have a personal relationship with Mr. Patillo, because when I heard that he took up the case, I was already litigating it, and I'm thinking, oh my God, they gave us a public defender. They're trying to sink the ship. You know what I mean? So
Oh shit.
I
Well,
wrote him a,
ladies and gentlemen, here's the story. Some of them public defenders will fight for your ass
listen,
now.
man, I wrote this guy a letter talking to him like he was my child. And I really talked, like he was completely out of his league. And
Insubordinate.
yeah. And I sent him a copy of my motion that I was filing, and he sent me a copy of the work he was doing, man. And it was unbelievably good. So now, my first letter to him was like, Mr. Patillo. My second letter was like, Mr. Patillo, please. Hey, I apologized as much as I could. I told him I'm so sorry, because he was doing great work, and he fought for us and he won. And he established for the Florida Supreme Court that the parole process in Florida was really non-existent. It was just a matter of paperwork. And that was what got us, my class of defender, parole eligible juvenile, into the light, out of the darkness and into the light. And then in October of 2018, the new conservative bloc in the Florida Supreme Court said, no, we're changing our mind about that on something that was completely irrelevant to Florida, some case out of Virginia that really was never heard on its merits. The guy who filed it wrong, and the Supreme Court denied jurisdiction. And Florida said, oh, it was denied. Well, it wasn't denied on its merits. They never heard the case. They just said this guy filed wrong. So Florida was just quick to pull the trigger and pretty much snatched the chance from a whole bunch of guys, man. And I saw guys that were devastated in jail, making plans about being home and with their families. And then all of a sudden they just get sent back, man, summarily denied, never given a chance. And I was lucky. I had a very merciful and open-minded judge, and I had an attorney. Her name is Miss Ashley Kay. She now works for the public defender in the feds. I was her last big case in the state, and she stood in that ring, man, and fought for me with both fists. And she fought and she fought, and she ended up winning my eventual release. And not only that, there's a lot of people in prison, a lot of people who worked in prison that spoke on my behalf. I am here as the product of the work of a lot of people, and I owe it not only to them, but to the guys who come after me to succeed, to do well, because these guys, these sergeants who helped me, some of them are captains now, and what happens if 5 or 10 years down the line, there's another guy who needs somebody to speak on their behalf, and they say, no, because I helped that LaFleur and he turned into a real butthead, so I'm not helping you. So I really have a responsibility to those guys that are coming after me, where that captain, or maybe he's a colonel by then, will say, I helped LaFleur out and he did good. So yeah, man, I'll write you a letter or have your attorney contact me. So it's a cycle. You know what I mean? I just can't be an asshole, basically, because there's too many people, there's too much that this matters for,
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. This kind of leads into that. Or would you say you were guilty of what you did?
Of course, I would have pled guilty had I got the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, you are guilty. You confess to that. Now, would you say, from that perspective, looking on the other side, for the individuals that have never committed a crime such as that ever in their life, that's like the worst of the worst, what would be something you could tell the people about someone that's in prison for life that is guilty of murder that could possibly persuade their way of thinking of them in a different way. You know what I mean? Because most
Yes.
people are like, let them rot. They did it.
Right. Well,
Can people change for the most part? That's pretty much what I'm asking.
okay. We can always improve ourselves, given the opportunity and the motivation. Um, I mean, talking about the opportunities in prison right now, the programs are so few, and the ones that are there are really crap. There's very few programs that are worthy of a guy's time. And it's just a game. Most of it, you go there, you sit there, you get a piece of paper and you say, hey, I did a program. And everybody says, yeah, you did a program, and keep it moving. Um, First, I committed a completely, totally senseless crime. My crime was 100% avoidable. It was all on me. I was the person who took it too far. I was the person who, as they say, did the dummy, you know. But as far as there's other circumstances, I have known guys in prison, man, who really were standing their ground and couldn't formulate a good defense. I've seen murder happen for so many different reasons, for fear, for anger, for rage. And then, the guy who's just like that, slimy. I've seen hitmen in prison. I've seen every facet there is of the murderer and the murder, and bigger than that, bigger than the crime, I believe that every person should have the opportunity to be resentenced. If it were me, if I could be Lord Emperor of society for a moment, I would install a system where when everybody is sentenced, there's a caseworker there that gives them a list of objectives. And, the objectives would be time sensitive. If you have a 50-year sentence, they might give you 30 years worth of programs and say, come back when you finish these and we'll talk about it. We may give you, mitigate your sentence. They wouldn't give you 6 months worth of programs for life. But if you had life, they might give you 30 years worth of programs. So it's up to you. You want to do the programs, do them. You don't want to, don't. And I would do that. I would give guys an opportunity to demonstrate that they have improved, that they do deserve a second chance or a serious consideration. Because look, we as a nation, America, I love America. I think America is the greatest, far from perfect, but still the greatest nation in the world. You know what I'm
I
saying?
agree. I agree.
And we as a nation have not an identity crisis, we have an identity disconnect, because we as a nation, internationally, we always represent the underdog. We always represent the downtrodden, the oppressed, and in sports, we're always rooting for that fourth quarter touchdown or that last second jumper or the late inning home run. We want to see the rally. We want to see the comeback. There's a lot of guys. We are the most incarcerated nation in the world. We are the United States. We have more guys serving life sentences without parole than any other nation in the world. And we have more of them for their first offense. Now, I'm saying if a guy's been in prison 3 or 4 times and he finally got a life sentence, and I had a roommate who had been in prison 19 times in several different states.
Yeah.
And he used to get a pass every day to run to the law library. And I said, hey, man, let somebody else get that pass, because you had 18 tries to stay out there. Let somebody else get a pass.
Yeah, I've heard that a few times, my friend,
Sure.
doing time. Yeah.
Sure, but there are guys that are on their first bid, their first conviction, and have a life sentence without parole. They need a second half. They need a chance to get back in the game. There should be something for the guys who have one mistake to have a chance. I mean, what about our own underdogs? What about our own downtrodden? What about our own oppressed? We have guys that are oppressed by the legal system, and bigger than that, there's plenty of guys who just had no idea how to represent their cases to their attorneys. A lot of guys I knew in prison couldn't read when they got there. How can you help yourself if you can't even read a book? What is your knowledge? What is your experience if you can't even read? If you can't even read. But these guys were just chewed up by the system. and we as a nation need to do something for those guys, for the first offenders that have natural life sentences, because it's obvious, man. If a guy was 35 years old, never had a parking ticket, and ends up with a life sentence for something, I mean, I hate to just minimize it and say he had a bad day, but still, there's got to be something. There's got to be some way to say, man, let's revisit this guy and his issues and see if he can function again in society. You know?
Yeah.
And speaking of that, when I run into people out here, I let them know that I was in prison. I want them to know that I was in prison, because maybe I'm the only guy they're ever going to run across and communicate with who was in prison. And maybe I can change their perception of what guys in prison are like. And more times than not, they'll say, wow, man, I'm surprised that you were in prison. You don't seem like you were in prison. So at first I was thinking, well, maybe I'm intelligent. Maybe they think I'm smart. I'm too smart for prison or something. I don't know what
It must be the glasses.
No, man, I asked them, I said, what is it? And they said, oh, because you're not angry. And I said, well, hell, there's nothing to be mad at now, but you should have ran across me. You should have ran across me 5 years ago. You want to see somebody who was pissed?
Yeah.
But that's what they say. I don't seem angry. Like I'm supposed to be mad at the world that I'm finally free. So
convicts are supposed to be angry and grumpy
all the time. Yeah, all the time.
Well, let me ask you this. You said you've seen all types of murderers, man, from sleazy down to one wrong mistake type of individuals. And would you say, I've met a lot of lifers during my first bid. I was in a lifer prison, and they all seem to be like some of the most caring individuals I've ever met in my life, besides maybe one or two I didn't really mingle with. But they seem just your normal individual, man, and really good guys. Now, would you say that that's the normality that you might see from murderers, that it was just one wrong mistake and they're like, shit, what did I do? Would you say you've seen more of the sleazy type?
Well, the majority is the guy who's in denial. We had a joke that there was only 3 guys in prison guilty, me and 2 more that I hadn't found yet, because a lot of guys rationalize it where they're really not guilty of the crime. It's this thing or that thing or this other thing. So I would say that the bigger number of guys I ran across were the ones that were still trying to justify what they did.
Yeah.
Now I do know a few who accept responsibility for what they do. And it's difficult because there's a law in Florida that prohibits us from contacting our victim families. And it's a matter of equal protection. So you know how the law is. They can't really specifically target one guy or one class. So they make it where no felons can contact their victims or their victims' family members.
Yeah.
I am fortunate because my victims' family members reached out to me, and that allowed us to communicate, and that's a big part of really taking responsibility and moving forward. And it's not taking responsibility, because being responsible is not doing it in the first place. And being accountable is really what I'm looking for. I was able to hold myself accountable and to accept their view of me, you know what I mean? And communicate with them. And that goes a lot towards being able to grow as a person, being able to actually identify with what you've done. Because a lot of guys never get the chance to explain, never get a chance to say they're sorry, never get a chance to say, I know what I did to you and I apologize. You know what I'm saying? No matter how I felt about your son or your husband or your brother, no matter what happened, you didn't deserve to lose something out of your life. You deserve better than that. And that's something that we don't think about when we're committing these crimes, is there's a family. Everybody talks about, we take ourselves away from our family. That's true. Bigger than that, though, look at the family that's left behind on the other side. I was in prison, but if I saw something that I remembered from my childhood on TV, I could call my brother and say, hey, man, you remember when this happened? You remember when that happened? But there was a person that could never talk to their brother again. And if they could, they would rather their brother was in prison doing life than being dead.
Yeah.
So it's a hell of a thing to have to really come to grips with. And yes, I was young, true, and yes, obviously I was making a lot of stupid decisions. There was a lot of guys going through what I was going through, never killed anybody. So, the excuses are gone. There's just
Yeah.
there's no
Everyone
excuse.
knows not to.
Yeah, there's no reason.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
just something I should have never did.
And that's a good piece, man. I mean, have you come to amends with the family, or I mean, do y'all talk in a good note, or?
Actually, my one of my best friends is um, my victim's sister. She was my strongest advocate to help me get out of prison. She stood with the loudest voice, you know,
I'm
and
sure that held a lot of weight in the courtroom.
yes, didn't do well with the prosecutor. They didn't really enjoy that, but
Yeah. Were
you
they
know,
still trying to oil you up in there? The
oh
prosecutors?
yeah, I mean, but really, when push came to shove, my prosecutor was very understanding. You know, in spite of, I guess, her uh, professional, I don't know, tendencies. Because they tend to ask for the worst and all that. And I was very, very fortunate. I am very fortunate. That
Yeah,
things
man.
came
I'd
together
say
the way they
so.
did.
I
Yeah.
mean, how long have you been out?
I've been out since December 7th. I was resentenced on December 5th, and uh,
So you're
my
fresh out, man.
yeah,
Jesus.
my game time structure was so archaic. Nobody really understood how I was going to get game time, and I'm sure everybody who watches your channel knows game time is like time off for good behavior.
Yeah.
So when I was sentenced on December 5th, it was understood that I was going to do 29 or 30 more months, you know, and I was
Yeah.
disappointed. I wanted to go home right away, but man, hey, look, 29 to 30 months is still better than forever.
Yeah.
So I went back to the county jail, resolving myself to the fact that I was going to go back to prison for 29 to 30 months. And Saturday morning at 2:30, I got resentenced on a Thursday. Saturday morning at 2:30, they rolled my door and said, "Pack it up, you're out of here, you're going home,"
Whew.
because I got game time that nobody really considered, you
Oh
know.
man.
And
I'm
I was
feeling
like,
excited right now, and
listen,
I'm not even you, man. I'm feeling so good right now.
I was like, man, let me get the hell up out of here before they figure it out. And I went downstairs, and there were a few mishaps. Like, they had my release information from my first time in the county jail, so they were trying to give me some clothes that would fit somebody who was 5'6" and 140 pounds, and I was 6'1", 230. So I ended up going home in a sweatshirt and some shorts. And my brother called for a Uber car. My brother, who was in Alaska, called for an Uber car because I went out into the lobby. They gave me a 5-minute phone call, so I called him. It was only 10:30 there, 10:30 p.m. So I called him right before he went to bed. I said, "Hey man, they let me out." And he's like, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm serious, man." So he sent for an Uber car. Uber took me to Denny's. I walked into Denny's looking like I was a homeless guy, and I went in there and I ate some food. They made me eat it at the counter because they wouldn't let me go to a booth. And I'm thinking, do they think I'm going to steal the food that's already paid for? But look, I wasn't going to argue. So I ate some lumberjack slam breakfast, and after that, it was just one step after another. I had to stay in a motel because I had nowhere to stay, and everybody thought I was going to be out in 30 months. So I ended up getting a motel room I couldn't check into till 3 o'clock that afternoon. At 7 o'clock, I called my mom, and my friend Kim, my victim's sister. And I say that just so other people understand. She's my
Yeah.
friend. So her and my mom came to pick me up, and we went around. I got a cell phone and ate some food. Went into Walmart. It was crazy because it was Christmas season. And, in prison, you become accustomed to personal space. And when people invade that personal space,
Yeah.
you kind of get on edge. So these people are just running into me and running by, and it's just crazy, man. So my brother would say, "Go to Walmart." I'm on the phone. He would say, "Go to Walmart and go do this or that." And I would go look in there, and I'd call him back and say, "Nope, there's none there." I wouldn't even go check because it was just
Phil,
pandemonium.
I'll tell you what, them Florida Walmarts get crazy, man.
It was pandemonium, man.
God,
Yeah, it
man.
was pandemonium.
I swear they do. I've been to
Yeah.
Florida twice to visit, man. And them
Yeah.
Walmarts, I look forward to going because I knew there was going to be something going on.
Yeah. I
Something
ended
going
up
on.
staying at an extended stay motel for about 25 days and almost had to get a house trailer, which isn't bad. I mean, there's plenty of good house trailers, but I couldn't find
Anything's
a
better
place.
than the pen.
Oh, of course, I couldn't find a place to stay. Finally, there was a place that said on their application, it said, if you were convicted of a arson or a sex crime, you're going to be denied. But I'm thinking, well, hell, they didn't say any crime. So I
It's a murder.
Right. So I put in and I said, look, man, it was a long time ago. It was 30 something years ago. And they gave me a lease. So that's where I've been at. And
God, do you think they would have given you a lease? They're like, yeah, it was like 30 years ago, but they just released me yesterday.
well, thankfully we didn't get into that. I was to the point where I was going to say, I've never been evicted. I've never been late on my rent, but it never got that far.
I guess that's one of the benefits of having done 31 years. You can say that, and they're like, "Oh, that was forever ago,"
Yeah, that was a long
Yeah,
time. Look, I
he's
haven't
only,
even been arrested since. Not even
yeah.
I don't even have a traffic ticket.
That's it. Nothing
Yeah.
major. That's crazy, man. I want to speak more about this, but like I said, I got so many questions I want to ask you. Do you mind coming on for a part two, man?
Oh man, I can come on for as many times as you want. I
I
mean,
love it, man. I'm really enjoying. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I'm not even really talking too much, but let me ask you one more question before we wrap up this first part. Uh, a lot of people, I've done videos on lifers, and how they can be very friendly, or they could drop at a drop of a dime. They could snap and kill you. They got life. They have nothing to lose.
right.
Would you say that that's accurate in a sense?
Yes.
Because at one point, I mean, you didn't have no out date. You didn't have no light at the tunnel. You had life. You were considered a lifer,
Right.
Tell me.
Yeah, and basically, what it comes down to, like I said, when I went to prison, there were named men in prison. There were guys who had names for things they did in prison, and in prison, the universal language is violence. Violence is something that everybody understands, and
Yeah.
it's not just the willingness to commit an act of violence in prison. It's the willingness and the ability. If a guy knows that you're capable and knows that you're willing, well, that's a whole nother story, because now
Yeah.
he's liable to just say, I'm going to go mess with somebody else and leave this guy alone. And what it comes down to is, if you're doing something, whatever it is, when I went to prison, if you were doing something, regardless of what it was, if you were going to the canteen, if you were buying something to eat, if you were selling drugs, if you were anything, running tattoos, whatever you were doing, even if you weren't doing anything wrong, but you just still wanted to do what you wanted to do, you know, you had to be willing to go as far as or further than the person who wanted you not to do that. You have guys who, are wise enough to know that laws may change. So they position themselves by taking programs and by being productive. And you have some guys that just enjoy being productive. Any sane man wants to build something, no matter what it might be.
Yeah.
So you have guys that with life sentences that, me, I worked in recreation a lot. My job was to teach fitness classes and wellness classes and help train sports referees and run inmate programs. You know what I'm saying? Things that inmates benefited from, that we dedicated our time to. And you get that a lot with guys with life sentences, because even though prison is all we have, we still want to have the best of what is in prison for us. We want to have good sports leagues. We want to have things to do, And then you got the guys that have life sentences and don't give a damn. And the bad part about it is, those are the ones that really control the environment, because they're willing to just blow everything up.
Yeah.
Run around, act the ass, get the yard closed, get transferred. And, the way it is, and especially in Florida, it's a reactive society. So a guy does something really stupid, say on the softball field with a bat, and they lock him up and transfer him, and then they say no more bats for anybody.
Yeah.
Play kickball, you know. So those are the guys. It's the guys that feel and believe that they have nothing to lose are the ones that cause everybody to lose.